Section 1 of The Diary of a Dead Officer by Arthur Graeme West. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 1. Diary. On joining the Army as a private, January 1915. The last time in England. The first time in France. A fine day. The first time in the trenches. Thoughts about death. A letter from the front. West enlisted as a private early in 1915. The following extracts describe the impression produced upon him by his early acquaintance with army life. It is to be regretted that the diary which he kept about this time is very scanty, and there is no record available of the general frame of mind in which he enlisted, and of his early and more pleasant experiences of the army. In explanation of this there is an entry towards the close of 1915 in which he says, quote, "The earlier events of 1915 have to be put down here from memory in the briefest way, because I bought no diary, money being rare at the time. Lacking the stimulus to energy given by an allotted space to be filled daily, I never wrote. A perpetual undercurrent of search for a commission was the main thing, though on the surface life seemed much as usual." End quote. There is no doubt, however, that West was very keen to join. His enthusiasm is shown by the persistence with which he pursued the commission which was refused him owing to defective eyesight, and the evident satisfaction with which he records getting passed by a private doctor, quote, "more or less by ruse," end quote, when the regular recruiting doctor had ploughed him. For a time he was happy enough, finding congenial companions, and buoyed up by the consciousness of having done the right thing, and it is a little unfortunate that the first important extract, dated March 22nd, contains some rather snobbish strictures on his companions, and conveys a general impression of discontent which was not typical of his attitude at the time. In November of the same year he crossed to France. On joining the Army as a private, January 1915. Monday, March 22nd, 1915. The first and chief way in which these experiences offended me was by their irredeemable ugliness. This was horribly intensified after some month and a half, towards the end of which I was often happy, by 5 of the Fayex Romuli coming into the hut and crowding the number up to over 30. On Sunday, too, the day before this Monday, began an indefinite period of isolation for measles, and we were thrown together more. Marches in which these 5 were anywhere within one's range of vision or smell, not perhaps that they impinged so unpleasantly on that sense by the uncleanliness of their persons as by the rankness of their cigarettes, stirred in me such a spirit of fermenting malignity that I would cheerfully have killed them. I never hated army life so much. Their thick necks, whose lines were so graceless that seen from behind there was a continuous unbroken sweep from base of neck to crown, their big flapping ears, the inveterate curl under the hats, their insolent leering expression, or their vaguely wretched stupidity was stirringly noisome after the faces I was growing accustomed to as my own surroundings. I used to walk along, or I did this day, beside H and C, who had left their positions to come by me, while the air, soft as milk and as sweet, came past tainted by their vile cigarettes. The landscape, that seemed almost to complain that such as we 3 were could not visit and praise it as it deserved, being further dishonoured by these ugly presences, the companions of our constraint. If any more of these creatures come in and no change of huts can be made, They will rise like H.G. Wells' Morlocks in the Time Machine from their position of excluded ugliness and possess the house. The attitude of the former hut-dwellers is universally hostile at present, and some of those whose own social position was, perhaps, not before very well assured, are foremost in the underhand campaign of indignant protest. The last time in England. The Charing Cross Road, Monday, November 7th, 1915. As I began the journey through the raw November night, returning to camp, from this my last week-end leave, it pleased me to picture all those other Saturdays and Sundays, from early spring until the late autumn, that I had spent when my station had been at W, C, or S. It chanced that as I lifted the blind for a last sight of London, the towers of Westminster sprang in clear outline from the indistinguishable mass of mean buildings between them and the railway, and so moulded my yet vague memories definitely to the journey from Victoria to North London. I remembered, in an orderly, detached way, as if it were another's experience I was contemplating, the thrill of first contact with London as I emerged from Victoria Station into the open square, looking for a north-bound 'bus. True, I never felt free, never dreamt for a moment that the old days were back again. Myself and the city were too deeply stained with war. But I gained here a comforting security that the possibilities of my old life were being preserved, held in trust against the day when I should be able to resume them. The shops, the advertisements, the people hurrying about the streets, were evidence of the vitality of the former way of things. And it was thus that the women pleased me especially, by their brave show of other concerns than the war. How delightful it was to mark the spreading of a new fashion, and how kindly one felt to this one or that who, with the new full skirt swinging high above her ankles, gave assurance of a bold prodigality, an open loyalty to a code which many affected in these days to despise. But when the noisy patriotism of Trafalgar Square was left behind in the cool indifference of Charing Cross Road, I had usually, I smiled as I thought of it, left the 'bus and progressed in the fashion of a grazing heifer up that strangely attractive street, which had always seemed to me to contain symbolically in itself all the experiences of human life. The books alone, from Homer, Virgil, and the Oriental classics, to the slim volume of modern verse, a few slight poems in lame metre and uncertain of expression, gave the suggestion of a vast literary republic stretching from the beginnings of time until to-day, while the variety of sublime or trivial, Christian or pagan, homely or exotic, products of fine reason or depraved sensibility, were reduced here to a level of silent impotence, a dependence only on their appeal to something in the soul of some unknown buyer for their release from the dingy shelves. The first time in France. Friday, November 26th, 1915. We were all off parade in the morning, and went into a small shed in the orchard, full of sacks of potatoes and with the windows browned by smoke. I read the Saturday Westminster Gazette, others read or wrote. It was very jolly. We talked of the various ways of facing these experiences, whether to glorify present experience, in the words of C, or to dream Utopias of one's own, as A did. A, as C read an epitaph on a governess out of the S.W.G., remarked he wished he were a governess, and we built up a picture of a home in West Kensington, nice children, a nursery, toasting at the fire, a young, good-looking master. No parade in the afternoon. Read the Odyssey, and enjoyed it for itself and for the really novel exercise of making out the meaning of the lines and the new interest it gave to war. A fine day. Tuesday, November 30th, 1915. A very fine, clear, sunny day. We threw mangolds about all the morning as if they were bombs, and in the afternoon went a short march towards St. V. The sunlight lay on the wet cobbles of the road as we came back, outlining all the horses and carts with watery gold. The bare trees against the almost colourless sky were exquisitely beautiful, and filled me with an indefinable desire for something beyond that, I remember, Mark Rutherford speaks of. It was not connected explicitly with the war or the chance of death. I have always felt it looking at such scenes, and then, with the possibility of speedy death before me, I understood more clearly than ever before that I had got from this particular impression all that could be got, that it was perfect, and could not by longer living be at all improved or developed. One's wonder at all these things, the forms of trees, and the stars as I see them now at evening, is simply an elemental fact, permanently renewed, and always mixed with that painful yearning that I felt then. It is a mistake to look for any enlightenment, or to expect a time when one will somehow understand it. It is not intellectual. The first time in the trenches. Wednesday, December 7th, 1915. Trenches. A day like yesterday, but wetter. Paraded at 3:30 in haversacks and water bottle, ground sheet and leather jerkin for the trenches. Marched along a pretty bad road till dark, past an English cemetery full of little wooden crosses, until we came to a very ruined village. It was raining hard by now, and we were wet already. We struck off across the open over old trenches for almost a mile. We were meant to go by communication trenches, but they were so full of water that we had to go on top. The mud and water were worse than anything we had ever met. Many went in up to their necks, and all of us were soaked up to and over the knees. We passed the supports and reserve trenches with fires in braziers, and many dug-outs draped with ground sheets. In the support trench men were sleeping here and there outside, sitting on the firing platform in ground sheets. The trenches were wet but boarded at the bottom, so one did not walk in more than 3 or 4 inches of water. Our platoon was to go to the front line trenches, which were not trenches at all, but broken bits of trench, the tolerably whole parts of which we held in sections of 5. We 5 were together in post No. G at the extreme left end of that line. It was a very bad place. About 10 or 15 yards of sandbags were standing, but the tops had been knocked off and the things were low. There was no back to the trench at all, and the water was deep. We had nothing to keep it off us but a few sticks laid across. We had no shelter from the rear or side at all. The general idea was that we were the front line and had to hold it until the supports came up. As there was a wire entanglement between us and the supports, they would take a long time to come up, and we ourselves should be wiped out. Then the supports would be caught in the communication trench like rats in a trap and killed off too. Then the reserves would come into play, repulse the enemy and shell them out. The Germans were rather less than 200 yards off, too far to throw bombs, but snipers were active. Though no rifle bullets ever came near us, the Germans had machine guns trained along the top of the parapet, and they troubled us a good deal. At first we were quite amused and laughed at our position, but soon the damp and cold and the prospect of 24 hours' endurance of it, our isolation and exposure cooled us down, and we sat still and dripped and shivered. Flares went up continually, and occasional machine-gun bullets whizzed over us, and snipers shot. At 12:30 we were relieved by some of the X regiment and sent to post No. 5. We had got more or less dry while at the other post, and now got wet again, but the change was worth it. Across the whole bit of trench we now had a shelter of corrugated iron, which covered about 6 feet of space. Bombs and ammunition were stored in a kind of recess here, and it was therefore dry, though water lay underfoot in the trench. It had stopped raining. We now sat down on boxes of ammunition, and I took my boots and socks and puttees off, though my legs from the knees down remained like marble all the time. G passed during the night asking for reports. There were none from us. We slept little and put no guard. Waking from short dozes with one's head leant back on the sandbags of the side of the trench, one saw a few stars, or the rising and falling light of a flare, and heard if a rifle or machine-gun fired. Thoughts about death. Undated. Death one regarded in many different ways, partly according as one's beliefs or convictions concerning an after state were bright or gloomy, partly according as one's love of life was intense or weak. I have no real firmly settled beliefs as to what will happen after death, though sometimes I think of a lease of more vigorous energy on lines higher than the highest I have known here, though not very different in kind. I remember feeling this just before we left England, and it was then, of course, that death seemed least grim. Another and more common form of death as a welcome thing was when we were in the trenches and it was very cold and wet and dull. Then I was glad to put my head up above the parapet, thinking that a bullet there was a possibility, and no unwelcome one either. Such feelings prompted action that might seem to be, but wasn't, courageous. Any ideas about personal meetings after death I never had. By far the commonest mood then was that I have mentioned, where death was a relief, most welcome in itself and of no positive significance at all. A slightly different emotional state was the purely fantastic, on the whole rather a happy state, and not necessarily associated with unpleasant circumstances. I could live quite happily and vigorously in it. It was the usual reply one gave to the question, "Of what use has all my elaborate intellectual training and my sensitising myself to exquisite impressions been, if I am to be killed or crippled in a month or two?" To myself in this mood I pointed out the value of my former life quite apart from its effects, insisted on the imperishability of those years, imperishable even if nothing succeeded them, just as much as if a well-filled half-century should come after them. And turning the thought round a little, I could say, what does it all matter, after all? It was good, and would always have been good. You could not have improved those years now, had you lived. What, moreover, does one life like yours matter? Your good life before this was under the hand of some almighty power whose actions didn't refer themselves to you, and so will it be with your death now, or your survival. Occasionally, again, I thought of it from the point of view of a full and happy youth suddenly closed before time could spoil it. The fear that a useless and ugly middle age might succeed my youth made me glad of death. I saw, though, even then, that this state of mind was more suitable to epitaphs on children's tombstones than to the reflections of a young man out a-soldiering, and I never really thought that I would find myself unequal to the test of maturer life, or that I should end in failure or monotony. The very blackest moments that I did sometimes go through, as at B, I have noted above, and they came again now and then, moments when all existence seemed futile, and even life in peace time appeared vacant and stalely useless; when all books seemed to have been written, all pictures painted, all experience and sensation opened up for no good reason at all; when the whole world was a silly blind drift, purposeless and unintelligible in itself, and populated by people whom one did not know whether to pity more for their brief mortality or to hate for their folly. There was nothing here, though, that I had not felt at Oxford or Highgate before war was thought of. It was a restless state when one's soul was masterless, and not common with me. But a desire to be alive was one that came oftener and in a far more imperious form than any acquiescence in the prospect of death ever did. Mostly, it must be admitted, it was for material joys that continuance of life seemed necessary, for the joys that would be open to me again after we were disbanded. This love of the forms of worldly things was what gave death its main ugliness, the conviction that never again, once dead, should I touch and see the shapes of material things that I had loved so keenly. A recital like Rupert Brooke's The Great Lover had become increasingly possible to me as my sensibilities had widened and grown more acute, and with this, of course, went a greater reluctance than ever to leave all these things behind me, whatever abstract beauties I might win in exchange. That I should lose my books and my pictures, and no more enjoy the activities they called up, seemed less painful, for they did not savour so intensely of earth, except some of them now and then, as did the quite material pleasures. And, moreover, it seemed that if any life were hereafter permitted, it would be of a purely rational or abstract kind, more akin, that is, to literary and artistic pleasures. In short, it was the animal that hated death and clung passionately to promise of life; the soul and the mind, save when more definitely animal, did not much repine. There were instants when all the pride of my flesh and the lust of my eye rose up in all their manifestations from highest to lowest, and willed majestically to live. Like Plato's many-headed monster, they were intensely vigorous, felt themselves supremely capable of action, and sought only the opportunity. A letter from the front. An Estaminet. Saturday, February 12th, 1916. Dear Lad, I had your letter this afternoon and set myself to answer it at once. We have had rather a bloody, literally, time of it. The tab I had met earlier at Woldingham was shot in the head and killed instantly one night, standing next to me, and you may have observed that we lost several officers. We had an extraordinarily heavy bombardment. Also, I had rather an exciting time myself with 2 other men on a patrol in the no man's land between the lines. A dangerous business, and most repulsive on account of the smells and appearance of the heaps of dead men that lie unburied there as they fell on some attack or other, about 4 months ago. I found myself much as I had expected in the face of these happenings, more interested than afraid, but more careful for my own life than anxious to approve any new martial ardour. I become, I assure you, more and more cautious, though more accustomed and easy in face of the Hun. For the moment, thank God, we're back resting, and the certain knowledge that I shan't be killed anyhow for a day or two is most invigorating. The spring is manifest here in young corn and the very air and strong winds. And even here I react to it, and find myself chanting verses of Love in the Valley, as I did last year in Surrey. I have an odd feeling, though very insistent and uplifting to me, a feeling which I probably vainly unfold to you, of being so integrally a part of, and so thoroughly approved and intimately associated with all these evidences of spring, that Nature herself will not suffer me to be killed, but will preserve unharmed a lover so loyal and keen-sighted as myself. We shall see. I got a Spencer from tea, and am now travelling through the Faery Queen with the chaste Britomart. Yes, by all means send me Tom Jones. Those long things I can manage very well here, when we are back from the hellish trenches, where I find it hard to read, though I can manage to write letters more or less. I believe I shall get leave, if I am not killed or wounded first, certainly in 2 months' time, and possibly before. It is bruited about that the battalion starts leave in a day or two. My God, what heaven it will be while it lasts, and what awful hell going back. However, I live so utterly in the moment that I can easily shelve the last few hours till they come. I hope it arrives when the spring is farther on. I will bear witness to all I can to keep you out of the Army. I am so intensely pleased that you've not got forced in yet, and I hope you will still escape. How bloody people seem to be in England about peace and peace meetings. I suppose they are getting rather Prussian in the country. But are all peace meetings always broken up by soldiers, who've probably never been here at all? I have contracted hatred and enmity for nobody out here, save soldiers generally, and a few N.C.O.'s in particular. For the Hun I feel nothing but a spirit of amiable fraternity, that the poor man has to sit just like us, and do all the horrible and useless things that we do, when he might be at home with his wife or his books, as he preferred. Well, well, who is going to have the sense to begin talking of peace? We're stuck here until our respective governments have the sense to do it. Send me Tom Jones, then, if you please. I must really stop, dear lad. A.G.W. End of section 1.